Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Horror Noire, a history of Black American horror from the 1890s to present, 2nd edition. By Robin R. Means Coleman. Narrated by Julienne Irons. Forward. I love horror. I engage the genre as a consummate fan. Importantly, I also contribute to it through my award-winning books and short stories, as well as screenplays. When I moved the deep regard I have for horror into a pedagogical space, with my 2017 UCLA course, The Sunken Place, Racism, Survival, and Black Horror Aesthetic, it was inevitable that I would engage the scholarship of Robin Means Coleman and the first edition of her book, Horror Noire 2011. Her book helped me put horror, Black horror, into necessary socio-political and historical context. Horror Noire and Jordan Peele's Academy Award-winning 2017 movie, Get Out, came together at the perfect time. It had not dawned on me that I could have a Black horror course before Get Out, and that it could be so richly enlivened by the historical accounting in Horror Noire. Get Out was the reference point to talk about Blackness, horror, and lived experience. Horror Noire was the cinema-based study of these topics, remarkably going back to the 19th century. Since The Sunken Place, I co-executive produced the award-winning documentary Horror Noire in 2019, based on Robin's book. Still more recently, 2 of my films have been included in the Horror Noire film anthology. Today, Horror Noire is the eponym for the Black horror genre. It is certainly time for a 2nd edition of the Horror Noire book, and I am glad that that time has arrived. But what is this thing we call the Black horror genre? As I said in the Horror Noire documentary, Black history is Black horror. Embedded in this definition, Black history is Black horror, are the ways in which the U.S. has engaged in anti-Blackness practices. For me, this terrible history hits particularly close to home. My mother, Patricia Stevens Dew, was a civil rights activist. She is in the Florida Civil Rights Hall of Fame. In 1960, she was part of the first jail-in Florida. My mother was simply seeking basic human rights for Blacks in America. She and other students from Florida A&M were jailed for 49 days. Worse, she paid a terrible physical price as police fired tear gas canisters at her, permanently damaging her eyes. I know all too well that in our lived experiences, Black history is Black horror. Black horror evidences enormous capacity to interrogate this festering wound in the American psyche that has been present since our nation's birth. Black horror has powerfully examined the monstrosity of racism, and Horror Noire digs into those presentations, such as them, 2021, and, significantly, Black horror need not always be about the horrors Blacks have to navigate because of the identities that they hold. Horror Noire captures us just being, doing so through discussions of films like Night's End, 2022. The point is that Black horror isn't always historical trauma porn. Rather, Black horror is also the universal through the specific. It can point to specific social, political, and family histories and stories of African Americans, even as racism isn't the monster. It can be a place to showcase scares that are meted out or navigated by Black people. It moves beyond the tropes to show Black characters and their full humanity. Black horror can simply be the end. The great thing about the horror genre is that it is an emotion. Was it scary? If it was scary to you, then it was horror. For different people, they will have vastly different definitions of what is horror. For example, Eve's Bayou, 1997, which is discussed so well here in Horror Noire, to me, that's horror. It is brilliant Black horror. Some people might say, well, isn't that a family drama? Absolutely. But there is also a bit of the metaphysical and voodoo in there. And, of course, the family dynamic is so horrific. That's what makes it horror. The monster is in the house. The worst monsters do tend to come from right inside the house, inside the family, and sometimes inside ourselves. So much has happened since the first edition of horror noir, and I am excited that the second edition is capturing the progress in the genre of the last decades, while too looking forward to the future of Black horror. Black women as directors and stars in the genre have taken center stage. Jordan Peele's win of the Academy Award for Best Screenplay for Get Out whetted the appetite for still more Black horror. For example, Us, 2019, Candyman, 2021, Tales from the Hood 2, 2018, and 3, 2020, and Nope, 2022. Streaming services, in part due to the pandemic, saw an explosion of Black horror being featured on the small screen. Bad Hair, 2020, Bodycam, 2020, His House, 2020, Spell, 2020, and the Horror Noir Anthology, 2021, to name a few. Robin brings fresh critical cultural attention to the genre's new directors, for example, Nia DaCosta. Themes, for example, Black films absent a focus on anti-Blackness and absent the usual stereotypes and tropes, and controversies, for example, trauma porn. Horror Noir, 2nd edition, proves that the study of Black history is Black horror. Tananarive Due, MFA, UCLA instructor, American Book Award winner, NAACP Image Award winner, 2008 Carl Brandon Kindred Award winner, 2016 British Fantasy Award, 2020 Ignite Awards winner. Preface to the 2nd edition of Horror Noir. When I wrote the preface for the 1st edition of Horror Noir, I was motivated, in part, by a feeling that I had to justify why I would write a book on the history of an often disrespected film genre, horror. If horror was rendered a niche study in the so-called scholarly canon, then one can only imagine the ways in which Black horror was marginalized. It was not merely my imagination that I was taking a risk. In spite of the academic freedom protections that being a then-tenured associate professor might engender, I was soundly warned off writing a book on Black horror by those who thought it would jeopardize my prospects for promotion to full professor. The study of Black horror was simply not viewed as enough. For example, I was cautioned that absent the comparative, for example, whites' participation in horror, the book would be too narrow. And absent physiological responses to horror, for example, as one person wrong-headedly suggested, I could explain the violence purportedly endemic in Black communities through horror. A critical, cultural, and/or historical examination of Blackness through the lens of the horror genre was an odd thing. In response, I wrote a preface that I remain proud of. It is one that, through personal storytelling, claps back at those lightweight objections while centering Blackness and Black horror in our understanding of American history, pop culture, and progress. I am so glad that I did not listen to the skeptics. Instead, I found the scholarship of Francis Gateward as a motivating force, confirming my decision that the study of Black horror was necessary and valuable. In 2004, Gateward edited a special edition of the journal Genders entitled Scared of the Dark, Race and the Horror Film. I was emboldened to press on with my full history of Black horror beginning in the 1800s, through my cultural analysis, in my unique voice. But the important lesson here is gratitude, particularly for what I affectionately call my sister scholars, like Gateward, who have had an impact on the continued study of Blackness and horror. Enter award-winning writer and scholars Ashley Lee Blackwell, St. Joseph's University, and Tananarive Due, UCLA. It was Blackwell who read the 1st edition of Horror Noir and saw its adaptability as a documentary film. It was Due who launched her course, The Sunken Place, Racism, Survival, and Black Horror Aesthetic, informed in part by the contours of Horror Noir, the 1st edition. Blackwell, Due, and I, 3 fierce Black women, came together for Horror Noir, the documentary, as co-producers in talent, and have been connected ever since, further advancing interrogations into race, media, not just film, and horror. Horror Noir is now a part of the popular lexicon as an eponym to describe the genre of Black horror. Get Out, 2017, a Black horror film, has earned an Academy Award. There is an ongoing rush to produce more Black horror across media platforms. Black horror is enjoying mainstream appeal and major industrial support through funding and distribution. Gone are the days of justifying the discursive and cultural importance of Black horror. Yes, I was promoted to a professor for my various Black horror projects. In the preface to the first edition of Horror Noire, I recalled how I walked in the footsteps of George Night of the Living Dead Romero in our shared hometown of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. A few years after my book came out, I caught up with Romero at a horror convention and listened to his a posteriori arguments about the function of Blackness in his Dead series. He co-signed on a key inquiry that shapes the study of horror. What is scarier, the frights that we create for the screen, or the horrors that the society mets out on itself? Today, Jordan Peele is influential in shaping modern horror. In addition to his Oscar-winning writing for Get Out, he has earned acclaim for Us, 2019, reintroduced the Twilight Zone TV series, 2019, sparked the formation of countless scholarly conference presentations with Candyman, 2021, and invited praise for his reminder of the Black rodeo tradition through his frightening Nope, 2022. Peele and this generation of horror creators, like Nia DaCosta, Miosha Bean, and Mariama Diallo, are taking stories of Blackness to new complex and interesting heights, sans the B-movie low-budget stigma. They are crafting bold, entertaining stories. These creators and a great many others have produced much since Horror Noire First Edition. It is time to re-examine this daring genre, while shifting away from here's a stereotype, there's a stereotype missives. Black horror deserves better, and this generation of image makers delivers. Preface to the first edition of Horror Noire. Rick Warland, 2007, in his book The Horror Film, rather cheekily, though astutely, observes that horror film book authors have a propensity to include more or less ironic declarations of whether their interest in horror films began in childhood or fairly recently, implicitly arguing that one's credibility to speak about the genre was somehow either enhanced or hurt by just when the writer's interest began. Here, I join in this trite trend to offer my own declaration of interest. I got into horror films at a very tender age, perhaps as early as 5 years old. This revelation is about more than me confessing the psychological jungles of my slightly insane childhood. My coming clean about consuming horror and liking it is offered to give you some sense of my unique experiences with horror. It is my hope that this glimpse into my psychosocial world will help you understand where, in part, my interpretations of Black's representations in horror films are coming from. Confessions of a Horror Kid. I write this book flush with the sense of entitlement. I was born and raised in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. For you truly die-hard horror film fans, I need not say more, as you already fully understand how I can claim this book to be my destiny. For those of you who might need a hint, my birthplace is home to the Hercules of horror, George Night of the Living Dead Romero, as well as to special effects creator extraordinaire, Tom, Godfather of Gore, Savini. As a preteen, I was keenly aware that I was quite literally walking in the footsteps of Romero and Savini in my favorite Pittsburgh shopping complex, Monroeville Mall. The mall, as we Pittsburghers call it, is the spatially and ideologically terrifying centerpiece of the 1979 Romero film Dawn of the Dead. The film also features the spectacular living to undead effects wizardry of Savini, who even appears in a substantial cameo role as a biker zombie. In 1979, at the age of 10, I very much liked doing what bored kids across the nation like to do. I hung out at the mall. The teen character Flipdog, Danny Hawk, in the movie White Boys, 1999, put this mundane, modern youth rite of passage into perspective rather succinctly. All they do is hang out at the mall every day and walk back and forth from Foot Locker to Chi-Chi's, Chi-Chi's to Foot Locker. Those are whack fucking activities. Whack indeed. It was kids of my generation who shamelessly started the trend of ditching sandlots and playgrounds, opting instead to walk the wings of shopping malls like zombies. But Monroeville Mall back in the 1970s was really something rather special. For one, its main floor was then made up of an indoor ice skating rink. With the rink enclosed in plexiglass, it looked much like the Civic Arena, aka the Big Igloo, home to the Pittsburgh Penguins. One could sit at the adjacent Papagogo, a restaurant modeled on a hot dog stand, and watch little future Mario Lemieux awkwardly speed up and down the ice, while little future Michelle Kwans kept to the center of the rink, cross-cutting and jumping. A few years later, the mall management, failing to heed Romero's missive on the dangers of mass production, would tear out the one-of-its-kind ice rink and Papagogo combo. A cookie cutter, pun intended, Mrs. Fields is now where the center ice used to be. I saw Dawn of the Dead with my grandmother and mother at the Greater Pittsburgh Drive-In Theater, which often featured late-night horror movies. Though a decade after Night of the Living Dead, Romero's Dawn seemed to attract its fair share of black viewers. There are perhaps two intersecting theories about black folks' affinity with the Dawn film. The first explanation is that a decade earlier, many of the theaters that showed Night were located in inner cities, serving a predominantly black audience. Perhaps access contributed to Black's initial love affair with Romero. However, I think that proximity was just one part of what brought black viewers to subsequent Romero films. The other key enticement was that Night had Ben, Dwayne Jones, a complex, emboldened black starring character who was calm under fire, competently took charge of a deadly situation, and who surprisingly kicked some white butt and took names. After all, Ben does slap around and shoot a white man. We, two women and a kid, rode out to that drive-in to see if Romero's Dawn would again deliver to us another non-shuffling, anti-exploitation, empowered black hero. Romero did not let us down. He provocatively provided a black conqueror, and more, through the hardy character Peter, Ken Foray, who survives the zombie plague and seeks safety along with a relative stranger. A very pregnant white woman, gasp, Francine, Galen Ross. Would Peter and Francine find hope in a zombie-free life elsewhere? Who is going to deliver Francine's baby? Double gasp. Be it 1968 with Night, 1979 with Dawn, or even today, such representations of race, sex, and gender relationships still remain a big deal. If memory serves, my trip to the drive-in with my folks was made all the more sublime when Night came on after Dawn as part of a special Romero double feature. I kept my sleepiness at bay so I could again take in Night. I'd seen it before, with the mature eye of a 10-year-old. I saw the flesh-eating as nasty. However, I was indescribably, deeply affected by Night's infamous ending that served in my mind, then and now, as a powerful indictment on race relations. In the heart-wrenching closing scenes of Night, after Ben has beaten all odds to survive the night against the cannibal zombies, he is symbolically lynched by a mob of shotgun-toting white men. The film reflected directly upon the social climate of its time. The assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. occurred the very day, April 4th, 1968, Romero was driving Night to New York City for distribution. For many black folks in 1968, on the heels of Dr. King's assassination, it was plausible to question if a self-assured black man like Ben could at least safely exist on the big screen. Though Romero's film was fantastical with its flesh-eating zombies, it was still a film of significant realism. He directed the attention of the film's audience, demanding that we take account of how in the real world of black men, white mobs are far more deadly. I recalled my grandmother being willing to place her hand on a stack of Bibles and swear that she recognized one of those gun-toting, black man-killing so-and-sos, as she called them, featured in the film. I hate to say it, but she may have been right. Real-life Pittsburgh area police and other locals appeared as extras in the pivotal night scene that decided Ben's fate. What we saw in Dawn and Night were truly our Pittsburgh experiences on that screen. Pittsburgh, like many U.S. cities in the 1960s and 1970s, made it easy to be hesitant about its progressive potential, particularly for minorities. Pittsburgh was, and is, a segregated city. Its neighborhoods are culturally rich, but they also serve as de facto racial boundaries. The Bloomfield neighborhood is predominantly Italian. The Polish Hill neighborhood speaks for itself. On the north side of the city, Black folks, especially those living in the segregated remote elevations of the Northview Heights housing project, have to go through great efforts to reach Pittsburgh's downtown. They must get down from atop the city's steepest hills, cross over the flats, and make their way across bridges over Pittsburgh's famed three rivers, the Allegheny, the Monongahela, and the Ohio. To get downtown, also known as Pittsburgh's Cultural District, the Cultural District happily plays host to touring Broadway shows, conventions, and even on occasion, a classic horror film festival. To connect with those Black folks living in, for example, the altitudes of the city's east side, requires comparable effort. Hence, not only is interracial connection a bit of a challenge in the old Steel City, but also intraracial uniting is not all that easy either. In 2005, Romero made his fourth entry to the Dead film series with Land of the Dead. Land's social commentary is all about boundaries, corporate versus public, rich versus poor, insiders versus outsiders, and location, particularly how those darn three rivers reinforce all manner of divides and separation. I cheered while watching Land as the Black gas station attendant-turned-zombie rebel faction leader took the very long walk down out of his neighborhood. He dove into the point where the three rivers meet and marched across the water's murky bottom with his army of dispossessed compatriots to express his dissatisfaction, in his own special way, about the values of those on the other side of the racial, class, and corporate tracks in the Cultural District. Romero does get Pittsburgh so very well. Pittsburgh has also, dubiously, afforded me some additional horror cultural capital to draw on. In 1982, the horror film White Dog told the story of a vicious German shepherd dog trained by a white racist to kill Black people. When people remarked on the fantastical storyline of White Dog, I reminded them of Dolfo, an Alsatian police dog. In a Pittsburgh suburb in 2002, Dolfo had 3 official complaints lodged against him by Blacks for unprovoked attacks. Things came to a head when the dog opted to rip into a 9-year-old Black boy, rather than pursue, upon its white handler's command, a nearby fleeing white drug suspect. Dolfo was suspended from the force. At present, Pittsburgh is also home to a vampire meetup group, but then isn't every city? And it is working to expand its werewolf group for people like Nicole, who post on the werewolf.meetup.com message board. Hi everyone, I'm 20 years old, female, and a werewolf. That's about all. The city also boasts the Pittsburgh Ghost Hunters Association, PGHA, that has been investigating paranormal activity in the area since 2002. The hunters of the PGHA claim to be particularly knowledgeable about instrumental transcommunicating, ITC. That is, they record messages coming from the beyond. Think Michael Keaton in White Noise, 2005. So yes, that I hail from Pittsburgh and that I am a horror fan from way back means that I bring a novel relationship to and unique perspective on horror films. Racing horror. My interest in horror flicks and their narratives on race certainly does not begin or even end with Romero's films. Films like King Kong, 1933, with its ooga booga chanting dark natives who are enamored by white skin, are extraordinarily useful in putting a spotlight on how we understand the role of race, as well as imagined cultural practices. And do not get me started on hip-hop culture-inspired movies such as Bones, 2001, with their neo-Blaxploitation themes set to a rap soundtrack. The tie that binds all of the films I will examine here is their ability to inspire provocative treatments of race and to offer unique lessons and messages about race relations. I will show through this book that there are a great many horror films that contribute to the conversations of Blackness. I believe it is particularly important to understand that there is a wealth of horror films, often presented by Black filmmakers, such as Spencer Williams, The Blood of Jesus, 1941, Bill Gunn, Ganja and Hess, 1973, and Ernest Dickerson, Death by Temptation, 1990, that feature Black themes, Black cast members, and Black settings that contribute novel content to the genre. Horror has something to say about religion, science, foreigners, sexualities, power and control, class, gender roles, sources of evil, an ideal society, democracy, and so on. These topics take a compelling turn when examined through the lens of Black culture. My point is that the story of Blackness, as told through horror, is a complex and interesting one. While horror has at times been marred by its B-movie, low-budget, and/or exploitative reputation, one cannot discount its unique skill at exposing the issues and concerns of our social world to include our racial sensibilities. One way of denigrating the horror genre, writes Hutchings, is to denigrate its audiences by arguing that the only people who could actually enjoy this sort of thing are either sick or stupid, or sick and stupid. I do not want to give short shrift to what is, for some, a troublesome bee in their bonnet about horror films. Many of these movies are indeed rife with gore, the sick, and thin on scripting, the stupid. Horror films are rarely Festival de Cannes top-prize material, but their audiences may be far more astute than critics and some scholars give them credit for. They understand that the whole of the genre is not inane, and that horror filmmakers reveal something much, much more horrifying. That our world and relationships are really being held together with little more than spirit gum. Night of the Living Dead is now a cult classic. Most aficionados agree that it is one of Romero's greatest contributions to the genre and to the medium. However, it's been over 40 years since Night demanded that we ask ourselves what is scarier, flesh-eating zombies, or what we are doing to each other on a daily basis. So there you have it. Clearly, I believe the horror genre has great revelatory promise, and that is what moves me to explore its myriad definitions of Blackness, as well as what the genre reveals about relevant Black character types and about Black's levels of participation in film, and Black's contributions to our social world. Introduction. Studying Blacks and Horror Films. 1 second into Jurassic Park, 1993. Unnamed Blackguard No. 1 is charged with moving a velociraptor into a holding cage. "Don't do it! Don't go in there, Blackguard No. 1!" 4 seconds later, Blackguard No. 1 is pureed by the velociraptor. Jurassic Park may have been thrilling science fiction entertainment to some in that darkened Columbia, Missouri movie theater. But for me, this early scene of Black annihilation promised a horror show. I recall spending several minutes mourning Blackguard No. 1, Geoffrey C. Brown, whose death was witnessed for the singular purpose of evidencing what we all already know, that a velociraptor is a badass monster. To be sure, filmmakers such as Steven Spielberg savvily toy around with audiences' expectations. This includes figuring out that there is no better way to demonstrate someone's, or something's, extreme deadliness than for it to secure a bloodbath victory over a Black man with a big black gun. As those around me in the theater tittered with laughter at the antics of children meeting dinosaurs, I was feeling oddly uneasy. Perhaps because I was now looking at the bloody stump of Jurassic Park's Black engineer, Ray Arnold, Samuel L. Jackson. The dinosaurs had gotten him, too. Ray was not the unlikable lawyer, the corporate secrets thief, or even the big game hunter, who were all, deservedly, eaten by the reptiles. Like Blackguard No. 1, Ray Arnold was an innocent. As such, the only two Black characters in the film were united in that they experienced gruesome, absolutely unwarranted deaths. The purpose of this recollection is to reveal that, at times, Black audiences have a rather unique relationship with the U.S. film industry's presentation of Blackness. Some may bring to and take away from their film viewing experience culturally specific expectations, what Kozel calls the racial gaze, in which they hope to see themselves as whole, full, and realized subjects, rather than simply window dressing on the set, or human meat to up a bloody body count. In this second edition of horror noir, Blacks in American horror films from the 1890s to present, with greater insight and elaboration.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?